So for me, like if something's on fire, that's a good day. Like that's my focus, that's my priority.
Hello and welcome, Budri Gamawara from the Gadigal Lands here in Sydney. It's Startup 360 for 2026. Yay!
We're back.
I'm Simon Thompson, editor of StartupDaily.net, and
Majella Campbell, CEO of Fish Banners.
great to have your company again for another year. Episode 42, we kick off 2026 with our fantastic Matt helping us out along the way as well. Before I go any further, I do want to say that Startup 360 is supported by Deal. Hire, manage and pay anyone, anywhere. Great to have Deal on board as our new sponsor for the year. It's fantastic. Now, if you're coming to Startup 360 for the first time, you can find it on Spotify, you can find it on Apple, you can find it on YouTube if you like to watch. Don't do it while walking around because you will hit light poles or maybe some EV chargers along the way or trip over a rubbish bin. Don't do that.
Been there.
Sit there in the comfort of your lounge, but you can, of course, listen. So do hit subscribe on any of those channels. It comes out every Friday, and we talk to a fantastic person every week, as well as catching up with the latest news, which we're now going to call the Deal Spiel.
I love it.
The Deal Spiel.
Well done, Matt. New name.
2026, yes. Thank you for that one, Matt. Now, just to understand, what we do here is it's more founder fun than founder mode. We'd like to find out what makes people tick. Lift the bonnet, have a chat to them about what they're thinking and what's going on in their lives. And we have a fantastic founder joining us today, a new one, but boy, what an impressive resume.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I want to be like her. She's got such a cool rap. Maddi Ingham, co-founder of GreenPay.
Yeah, so that's going to be coming up shortly. But before we do that, we do talk about the news. And of course, because it's been a little over a month, hope you had a great summer, by the way.
How was your break?
Mine was really good fun. Less cricket than I planned, but that's okay. I got to do some other things. My wife, and I have to give a big shout out to Sal. She was flat out because she runs the Sydney Seafood School at the brand spanking new and very good looking Sydney Fish Market. I have to take you down there. The whole thing now, it's completely transformed. It's like the place was just left to the bin chickens and the seagulls after 4 p.m. most days. Now everyone is going there for, half a dozen oysters and a drink at sunset. And it is absolutely beautiful. It is such a wonderful spot to be. And the new seafood school looks beautiful, and it's got a view out over Blackwattle Bay. First class has kicked off this week, and it's now powering up. So I'm incredibly proud of her and everything she's done there.
Absolutely.
And I was delighted to have a little sneak peek behind the scenes. There's now a tour that you can go on through the fish market to get a feel for it and everything that's going on. They have something called Crab Med in there. It's for the mud crabs, which of course are live. And whilst all the other fish is down at, 1 degree or 2 degrees, Crab Med is at 22 degrees because, of course, they come from a tropical climate.
Yeah,
so they're keeping them warm and happy.
Nice. I love it.
Yep. They do have
Crab
fun
Med.
down there. Lots of high-vis running around. And because it is so good looking, it doesn't have that weird fishy smell at this point in time.
That's good. I'm excited. I got to go.
That said, the gulls are already there and the bin chickens, but it's all been very cleverly designed, so you've got a better chance of keeping your chips at this point in time.
Yeah, that was a big problem. So.
Yeah. It's no worse than Opera Bar at the Opera House.
Well, at least the Opera Bar have the dogs.
Yeah, well, I think
love
they
that.
looked at the dogs and they're probably paid more than your average supermodel bird scaring dog. So I'm not sure
Especially
that was in
trained.
the budget after you've already spent nearly $1 billion building a fish market.
I'm just glad that it's open and it's here and we can enjoy it.
Yep. Now, speaking of billions, some big news. Of course, late last year, Airwallex had a massive raise that valued the business at nearly $12 billion. But things got interesting to kick off the year when some pretty heavy-hitting lawyers started writing to the Nine newspapers saying, you did some stories with some confidential documents. We think you should take those down. Please do it and destroy the documents. And let's just say the Nine newspapers, which are the AFR, the SMH, and of course the Age down in Melbourne, were a little bit middle finger back on that one. And everyone got a little bit upset because Airwallex's attitude was, you're not supposed to talk about the fact that we're threatening you. And it got very, very crazy very, very quickly because the next thing that happened was news emerged that AUSTRAC had ordered an external auditor to have a look at the company's compliance with anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing. Airwallex says everything's above board and all fine, and they believe that in the 6 months that the review will take place before it reports back, they'll get another clean bill of health as they have previously. But it seems like it's all action there at the moment. And then it got even wilder because Jack Zhang, the co-founder and CEO, who has spent a lot of time in the shadows of the business, he was often described as enigmatic, and then he decided to have a public profile in the last couple of years, and now he's been out spruiking the business and appearing on podcasts and doing lots of conversations. He took to LinkedIn late last week, and one of the things he wanted to address was the IPO rumours, because he said, look, everyone's been talking about 2026, we never said that. And he's absolutely true about this. I did go back and check all of this. And some of the comments he made, and they date back to 2022. Initially, he said they could be going for an IPO in 2024 at that point in time. But by 2024, he said, look, we're going to get IPO ready in the next 2 years. But added there are no immediate plans to go public. So it was like, okay, yep, you fill the car with petrol and you make sure the tyres are all pumped up. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going for a drive. Get that? So he took that and said, look, probably 2028 is going to be the earliest time. And he complained about a few other things that were inaccurate. One was a person who got a job title above their pay grade, in his view. And then there was the whole Chinese customer data fight that happened last year. Now, here's where it gets a little bit weird, because I wrote to Airwallex to speak to their PR department and asked them, did you try and correct any of things? Because, to me, it's quite important. I have these conversations all the time. Did you write to the media saying, did you ask them to correct these things and say they're wrong? And if you did, what was their reaction? Or if you didn't, why not? And then I said, and is there anything in the Startup Daily coverage that, for the record, we need to correct? And the weirdest thing is it took several hours, I think more than 8, and I got it late on Tuesday night. I got referred to the media release for their AusTrack response, which I'd covered 5 days earlier, as thanks for checking in. Here's our answer on the website. So it's kind of like if I'd said to you, Majella, what date of the month is it? And you said Tuesday, was kind of like the conversation I had with him. So the one piece of advice I'd offer, and I wrote a big extended thing about startups often wanting to sort of blot out their past and their history. And I said, no, this is not like Men in Black. You can't just hold up the neuralizer and wipe everyone's memories. We do play, I think, an important role in charting the history. We are a first draft of history, as the joke goes in the media. But I would sort of say, if you don't make an effort to correct something, and I get these all the time. I even got one today, would you believe, about someone being not being a co-founder. And I said, that's okay, I will deal with that. And I don't know what happened, but I pointed out that they sent me a media release a couple of years ago where the person I described as a co-founder, they described as a co-founder. And they're kind of like, yeah, okay, we probably should have paid a little bit more attention. And often I hear from founders who say, yeah, we didn't pay that much attention to the media release when it first went out. And I'm like, guys, this is your public face of the business. Probably the facts matter at that point in time because you set the tone for facts, and this is part of Jack's point. What I found really interesting was he went on X, Elon Musk's Nazi porn bar, and put the post that he had on LinkedIn up there. And someone said, what's your or ignore v respond rule of thumb? And this is what Zhang said in reply. If it impacts customer trust, partner confidence, or team morale, we respond. If it's just noise, we don't feed it. Execution is the only reply that compounds. Now, I get that when you've built a $12 billion business and you've raised, hundreds of millions of dollars, nearly $1 billion in investment along the way, there's a fair bit of execution going on and it's going pretty well. Well done. But I don't think you can complain about people getting facts wrong if you don't put the effort into correcting those facts too, because I don't think any journalist sets out, well, maybe some do, but most journalists act in good faith. They want to get the facts right. And I know I struggle in trying to check facts with people all the time where they won't say anything, they won't respond, or, they just blank the question. So it's a two-way street. if you want to get the story right, and I certainly do, then you have to be willing to work with the people involved to say this is what's happening and this is what it all means. I know we live in a world where Tracy Flick, the US president's press secretary in the White House, can make any old shit up and get away with it. But, you know, I think there are limits to gaslighting and, you know, it's a small pond and word will get around.
Relationships and trust matter.
In this sector. And as I said in my story, I had a few people in the sector reach out. I had, you know, someone on the weekend who, you know, is the chair of a major tech company just going, what? I just don't understand it. I don't get it. It's like, what's going on there? What are they doing? And that seems to be the reaction to a few people about Airwallex.
As much as what you do say, as much as what you don't say. I think that's what a lot of people don't realise. They tell that to leaders all the time.
Yeah.
I think it's just as important when you're talking about what's in the media. Your actions also show, regardless.
Yeah. We should talk a little bit later to Maddi about this question and see what she thinks about that. Now, speaking of history, Sendle is suddenly history. This was, I think, a bit of a shock and a bit left field for everyone.
Yeah, it was a surprise. I didn't even realise. I thought they were going well.
Well,
I wasn't following it super closely, of course, but
we all thought
had my
with the
fair share of
merger,
packages.
when Fast Group was created in about the middle of 2025, and that was, of course, Sendle's a veteran Australian startup with James Tim Moody, well-liked, well-regarded founder. You know, they'd been the ones who'd been sort of David up against the Australia post-Goliath, and, you know, he'd always been the challenger brand against, you know, the behemoth, the government-backed behemoth. But I'm just getting back to words in 2026. And everyone sort of thought things, you know, it was doing okay and the merger was going to see them into the US market. Turns out one of the companies wasn't as liquid as it pretended to be. Of course, there's been a bit of blowback around Federation Asset Management, the Australian investor that went in there. Of course, eyebrows were raised a little bit last year when funding was raised and the early investors basically zeroed out their story and zeroed out their investment as part of this new deal. Because, you know, there's that thing where you come in and there's a promise of return. Generally, it's 1x or 2x of what I put in the later round. They got it to 8x.
Wow.
Which was pretty astonishing.
Yeah.
So I think in the end, the company, Sendle, had to be worth more than $60 million just to meet that obligation in terms of the business. And it kind of got very complex, and I know there's been a bit of blowback on the investor. And everyone, I just think it's sad to see Sendle go because it was a lot of hard work over a long time. But there was an interesting story that David Adams, my colleague at SmartCo, did about Touch Ventures, who zeroed their investment in the middle of last year after Sendle had taken on the additional capital, then got optimistic and went back, and they'd put more than 30 million into the business, then got a little bit sort of upbeat again and bumped it back up to a couple of mil when the merger happened in last August. And then the next thing, no, they're back writing it to zero again. And of course, Touch Ventures is an ASX listed VC firm that has been bouncing along worth a couple of cents in recent years. It's had a pretty torrid time. Came out of Afterpay all those years ago, and then morphed into Touch Ventures. But its portfolio is not looking particularly healthy, and I reckon when you take a 30 mil hit, that's pretty hard.
That'll do it. That'll do it.
Federation now seems to be going down the EVP path in terms of exploring all options to try and claw back the funding that it put in. But we'll see how that goes. Speaking of which, that case, I should mention, comes back to court on the 5th of February. I have in my diary at the moment. So we'll get the latest on Strong Room and EVP when that returns to the New South Wales court system in early Feb. What else caught your eye over the last couple of weeks?
So many. Do you want to talk about this, like South by Southwest, or do you mean generally?
Yeah, I was setting up for that.
Just checking. Okay, good. I was like, for a second I forgot how many we had afterwards, and I was like, are we filling time? No. I think biggest for me was probably South by Southwest.
That was another surprise. It kind of feels like we just kept getting the shocks on this one.
Yeah, it was a big few months. Big few months.
I knew that they had a 3-year get out of jail card available because a lot of people thought it was a 5-year deal, which it was, but there was that opportunity to change. And it kind of feels sad. And I think the saddest part was seeing people dance on the grave of it. Jessie Wu didn't hold back, having already called it the thing rent-seeking leech event. My point would be, if you want to see rent-seeking leeches, you really should just go and have a look at a few WA mining billionaires and the amount of money they get from taxpayers and governments. This one, I think quite modestly, 12 million over a 5-year period, I think is quite a modest investment because some of the numbers that they put out in terms of economic benefit far exceeded Tourism New South Wales, or Destination New South Wales it's called nowadays, far exceeded their initial estimates on the impact. And let's not forget that last year, UFC fan Chris Minns put $16 million into bringing that over 3 events to Sydney. So people kicking each other in the head got 16 mil for 3 showdowns out at Homebush for something like a $30 million return on investment. And we're talking 300 million, so 10x for even less money. So, and I do think it's sad because, yes, it was big and unwieldy. It was finding its feet. It was lean. But imagine if it was a startup and we turned around and said, look, you've had 3 years, not happy, no more money, fuck off.
I mean,
it's still got to build. And I get there were debates around cultural cringe and all of that. It's like, I'm not going this year, but I love going to WOMAD in Adelaide. Peter Gabriel started that back in the UK 30 years ago. It is now a massive, massive South Australian event. God knows they need it because there's no Writers' Festival this year. But there's nothing wrong with international brands coming to this country. Stop shopping on fucking Amazon if, you're worried about sort of international brands coming to this country. It's like, it was worth a shot. It was worth a go. And yes, it did rely on a lot of goodwill, and yes, it did tie up a lot of resources. And yes, maybe year 3 didn't have the same excitement that the initial ones had. But it's kind of like if you get bored with your partner after 3 years and end your marriage, it's like hang in there because it could get better and everyone could figure out how to do it better. And I know there were some very good people involved. And I also think the other part was startups were a small part of a much, much bigger picture. So there's arts and culture.
That's what I was going to say. I think, I can understand both sides of the coin here. Like I think when we're talking about, from the startup sector, talking all the time about government funding and resourcing and being able to how are we best being able to support the emerging businesses and empowering their growth. What I loved about South by Southwest was I think when you go to a lot of startup conventions or whatever else, it doesn't bring together the variety of people that South by Southwest did. I think, you could walk into a seminar or a program and you could be talking to the GM of Accenture, for example. You don't get those kind of opportunities generally at other ones because they're so focused on just the startup community. So I think it had heaps and heaps of things to be valuable for, I think, as well. The other side, I think, is failing fast at the same time. If absolutely in terms of economic output and all the rest, but I don't think there's a right answer. I don't think we'll never know at the end of the day, but I think
there's a couple of sad things going on. The US media company that owns the brand and was basically licensing it out wouldn't cut their rates. So congrats to them because they now get 100% of fuck all, which is just genius.
And that's what I feel like when you're bringing something overseas or you're doing all those sorts of ones, you have to be able to, and I think they had a great team on it as well, being able to make it good for the country that it's in. And I think obviously there's a lot of complexity there in terms of the inner logistics and why it is the way that it was. I think people do the best with what they can in front of them, and that's kind of what it's an expensive thing to run. It's not cheap, what they've done. So of course there's going to be costs to that. I think it's an HR question. It's you want to make your things as cheap or as accessible for your customers. Everyone always wants that, but you also have the business side that has to make sense on at the same time. So,
it was the International Convention Centre is an unwieldy beast, and it now stretches over 2 areas. It's great for getting your steps up when you go there. But I do get the exhaustion of walking and trying to navigate and find. It would have been cool if it was all in circus tents at Centennial Park or something like that, I
Yeah.
reckon. But because when you look out at Tumbalong Park, where they had the music and arts and culture and dance and film and all the other bits and pieces, that was like, every time I looked out the windows from the convention centre, it's like, I want to be down there.
Yeah, and that's why I feel like, I mean, like places like South Start do it so wonderful every year because there's variety. It's different every year. I think, you know, when you have size matters and all those sorts of things, but, you know, when you kind of South by Southwest, you know, by the second or third time, you're like, okay, I know where everything is. I've generally got the same idea. It's not that sense of wonder or whatever else that you kind of get when you're getting a new experience every time. So I think like lessons learned in terms of that is like investing in the experience and understanding the core value of what you're doing. I think the ones that do it really, really well is actually doubling down on the experience of actually being there as opposed to just rinse and repeating a sort of a cycle where you've got your general convention. I think
you're absolutely right. Craig and Danny put South Start on in a winery last year, and that was fantastic. Such a beautiful setting. Previously, it was in the Garden of Unearthly Delights, which is this crazy little space in the Adelaide CBD.
Yeah.
It's been in the wine centre, you know.
You got all the different places. I mean, and I think as well, when we're talking about tourism, they do it so fantastically because you get to see all the different parts about Adelaide that make it so wonderful. And like, I've only ever gone to Adelaide for South Start, and I feel like I've gotten to experience all the wonderful things about that. If I was coming to Sydney for South by Southwest, would I have that experience, the same experience? The answer is no. Doesn't mean that I think the value is different here, and we're talking about why you're there at different ones. I think there's lessons to be learnt from both sides, and
I do feel like there's a little bit of a loss because they had the budget to bring out some pretty big names, some pretty heavy hitters, and if you think back, it even dragged Mel Perkins out to sort of speak to the hoi polloi at one stage. It's not often you get a billionaire sort of fronting up.
No, she's rare.
Which was, that was a fantastic conversation. But the other thing is the major corporates were keen to get involved. And so there were also some very good people from the top end of tech coming to town.
Absolutely.
And you had access to them. And there was kind of the random bump-in stuff I just think is really important.
Massive. And that's what I mean. Like, it's just not replicated anywhere else. And so everything, I think it's just about understanding where your key value is and what you're actually delivering and then doubling down on that. And I think if that's what we're measuring against, I feel like that's the piece that's been missing in terms of the conversation. I think everyone's put a big blanket over the top of this and been like, oh, it's good or it's bad. There's so many other parts to it. I think it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be good and bad, and just like everything else.
Now, speaking of South Australia, because we should get to Maddi in a sec, congratulations to Catherine Bennell-Pegg, astronaut, Australian of the Year for 2026. Very exciting. I know there was a little bit of blowback because she hasn't gone to space yet, but I just think her achievements have been extraordinary. She's given us something to be very proud of. I know that there's always an argument over who's Australian of the Year, but I think it's an excellent choice. It was great to see Michelle Simmons, the silicon quantum computing pioneer, also at the forefront of the Australia Day Awards, recognised in those, and a couple of other great people as well. It was a good year, but I go back to my original thing, and I say this every time, and then I don't do it, but you and I are going to sit down and we're going to start filling out applications for It's an Honour. Go to the website, It's an Honour, I think it's .gov.au. Find some good people you want recognised and dob them in. You just have to say some nice things, get a couple of other people to say nice things about them, and it's well deserving, because otherwise politicians get the bloody awards, and they're doing just fine, thank you very much. Crowd them out with great tech people. I know Daniel Petrie got one a couple of years ago, so he's an AM nowadays, but I reckon we need more OAMs in the Australian startup ecosystem who give their time and love and effort, services to Australian startups. It's time.
That's great. I'm going to put that in your calendar and we can sort that out.
Calendar invite. We're going to sit down and do it. Of course, get in touch with us. Let us know in the comments section on the podcast if you've got a nomination, and we'll try and act on it.
Yeah.
Is that a good idea?
Nomination service.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's wrap for now. We'll be right back to meet Maddi Ingham from GreenPay.
Welcome back to Startup 360. We are joined with Maddi Ingham, co-founder of GreenPay. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Kia ora. Well done.
Great to have you along.
Let's start off. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
The elevator pitch, the quintessential question. I'm Maddi. I'll start where I am now and work backwards, and promise not to hit the mic as I go. Currently...
She's Kiwi, but she's got a bit of Italian in her.
I've already started with hand gestures. It doesn't bode well.
Story of my life, honestly.
So I'm, as you mentioned, the co-founder of GreenPay. So I can touch on a little bit, but we are the full stack payment processor that donates 50% of our profits back to the planet. And I've been doing that for coming up 2 years now, which is wild to think that time has gone so quickly. Prior to that, I've been in and around startups for a while now. So I was chief of staff at Verve Super and Verve Money. Prior to that, I had another chief of staff role and also did some dabbling and contracting work at Val, the cultured meat startup, and then started my career way back when in management consulting at BCG. So working entirely at the other end of town for Australia's largest corporations before diving straight into early stage startups.
What's it like being interesting and exciting in a management consulting group?
I'm not sure I'm allowed to say. Yeah, look, I think everyone there is convinced that they're the black sheep that kind of, made a mistake getting hired. But, 5 years on and I'm still convinced I was the personality hire.
That's great. Let's talk a little bit about impact and mission. Giving away 50% of your profits all towards a good cause. What was the driving force behind that?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of like the macro and then the more immediate. So Glenn, my business partner, my co-founder and our CEO, both him and I grew up in New Zealand. And I think growing up in New Zealand is very similar to growing up in Australia in that nature is kind of just involved in everything you do. Like you're, hiking or you're camping on the weekends or for your holidays, or you're at the beach and, throwing a ball around, or you do sports that are involved like being on the water or around the water or something. So nature is just so intrinsic to both of our childhoods. And I think on top of that, we'd seen, I guess, care for community is maybe the phrasing, where Glenn had gone around with his mother gathering signatures on a Greenpeace petition for something that they were doing at the time. And I conversely had kind of seen my parents picking up every single piece of rubbish we'd ever encounter on any walk or any trip to the beach or anything. And so I think for us, care for the environment was just something that everyone did and everyone thought about. And I think as we got older, we realised that maybe that wasn't quite the case and everyone wasn't out there picking up rubbish on their walks or doing what they could to make the world better. And so I think that was sort of the way we both grew up. And then through our careers, I most recently was obviously in Impact Super. So I'd seen the power of if a bunch of people do something which to them might feel like a small change, it actually is hugely impactful. Like switching your super to an ethical fund is one of the best things you can do for climate. And Glenn had been an impact VC at Albert's family office. So investing in, he's seen probably 2,000, 3,000 startups across his desk. And invested in the 20 or 30 or so, predominantly in sustainability. And so we both individually come to this kind of the power of business to make change. And, while governments are taking action or individuals are taking action, we need much more action faster. And the scale of the biodiversity crisis is so huge. I think we've lost 73% of biodiversity in the last 50 years, which I think you can kind of brush that off as a stat and then you go, hold up, that's a lifetime. Like you look around any room and that's happened in people in that room's lifetime, 73%. And no one's really talking about it. Three quarters
in 50 years.
Like wildlife populations we have lost. Like you go traveling, this is from the WWF, like their Living Planet report is phenomenal. You go traveling, you're seeing 3 or 4 of what used to be of the 10 there. And so we've kind of seen the scale of the problem, and I think it's easy to dismiss as, oh, that's happening overseas or that's the Amazon. But I think Australia is the worst deforestation hotspot in the OECD, and we don't talk about that at all. And so we wanted to look at a problem that could scale a solution that could scale to try and solve the scale of the problem. And depending on which stat you look at or which source you look at, there's about $4 trillion that goes through Australia's payment ecosystem each year. And predominantly those profits are either going back to the big banks who, according to the ACF, are either funding deforestation or, according to market forces, are funding further fossil fuel projects, or they're going offshore to American tech companies that aren't doing anything positive for Australia with it, beyond just jobs. And so that was kind of the nexus for the problem, and that's where we started.
Wow.
So how do you convince people to make ethical choices without effort? Because to me, that is the hardest part. Whilst there are some good motivated people in the world, the other side of the equation is if it's going to cost me time or money or margin or
it just can't be bothered or it's just I've got a million competing priorities.
How do you address that friction?
Look, that's probably one of our biggest problems in terms of it's the thing we come up against often the most in sales conversations. So I think the customers that we have on board are kind of fall on all ends of the spectrum. So we have some that are, impact is woven through everything they do in their business. They might be a B Corp or, internationally recognised for their impact work. For them, we lead with the sustainability piece. To them, that is the reason they will switch. Anything else is just a bonus. And then we have a bunch of customers that don't care at all, and they just like us because we had better customer service, or we walked into their shop and met them in person, or we've reduced their price by 10, 20, 30%, whatever it is. And so I think for each customer, it's kind of that classic sales, like what's important to them, what problems are they facing? And again, that's different for every industry. So you have to kind of figure out where their priorities are, where they're at as a business, where they're at as a business owner, and then play to the strength that we have that impacts them. But on the whole, for all of our customers, we can give them like the same or better technology, we can give them the same or better price, and then you can add the sustainability piece as well. And so we like to think it's a bit of a no-brainer. But yeah, that inertia hurdle is always a tough one, I think, for any company trying to do sales.
But just explain the what to our listeners, because where do you sit in the payments ecosystem?
100%, because you hear payments and that could mean a million different things.
Well, for most of us, it's doing a tap on our phone.
Is that Apple Pay? Yeah, what is that? So we sell to businesses, and then if we sign up a business, all of their customers would then be using GreenPay. So we have a full stack solution, which basically means it could be in-person tapping at a physical payment terminal, like you see in any cafe, restaurant, corner mechanic, florist, whatever. We also have a full payments and point of sale solution. So if you've got a small business that just wants an all-in-one, that's a really great solution for them. And then we can do online. So we've partnered with Australia's leading gateway. We're built on their infrastructure. And so that looks like anything from donations for not-for-profits, recurring subscriptions, or recurring billing. It might be direct debits. It might be working with platforms to embed payments into their platform that they can then mark up and sell, to just your stock standard like retail e-commerce payment. So we like to say we can work with almost any Australian business, which is the beauty of GreenPay and also sometimes one of the challenges.
So my illegal tobacco shop could actually get some good karma by using GreenPay.
100%. And it's an interesting ethical debate that Glenn and I have a lot of the time with partners or customers is, if BHP turned up tomorrow and wanted GreenPay, what would you do?
I'd say yes.
That's the side.
Incremental change.
Honestly, everything
Incremental
helps.
change.
That's the side Glenn and I fall on.
Yeah.
What would you say is like the biggest misunderstood thing about running an impact-driven startup?
I think there's a couple. One is, especially in the environmental space, is like the green tax. So I think people often discount us thinking, it's a green product, I'm going to have to pay a premium or it's going to be a bit crap. Because I think some of those early green products in whatever industry they were in maybe weren't the best because they weren't using chemicals or they didn't have whatever power they needed or something. So I think there's that kind of price and quality thing. And then I think Glenn and I are always considered around, I think for impact businesses, people think they maybe can't scale or they can't get the reach that they need to have in order to be impactful. And I think we're really lucky that there's a lot of Australian social enterprises that have come before us that have proven that's not the case. Like if you look at a Humanitics or you look at a Who Gives a Crap, they've found something that's effectively a commodity, as in, selling tickets has kind of been solved. Obviously, if I said that to the founders, they'd probably kill me. But on the whole, by and large, we know how to buy and sell tickets. Same with toilet paper. You can have 2-ply or 3-ply, or it can be made from bamboo. But again, we know how to wipe our butt. And so they've taken a commodity and turned it into a force for good. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with payments.
That's great.
And not only that, but you feel better wiping your butt because you're sort of having impact.
Yeah, and there's jokes on the packaging that you get to read while you're
exactly.
there.
And it looks
It's
good.
ticking all the boxes.
Even the wrapping looks good.
Yeah.
And it's actually really good value. So big shout out to Who Gives a Crap.
Also, the
Simon
number
and
of
team.
times my house has to run to the supermarket because we're in our last role, like the subscription model was phenomenal.
Yeah, we had 500 boxes at one stage because we just went away and then we got the timing
Just keep
wrong.
going.
Yeah, I think so. And then we just ended up with like literally 5 or 6 boxes. I was like, I don't know what to do with this. I just donated it all.
Amazing.
It was so much. And I felt good again. So, there's no errors here.
There you go.
Exactly.
Tell me about the experience of going from what I like to describe as cashing the check to writing the check, going from staff to being a founder. What was the thing that suddenly struck you that you thought you knew as a chief of staff that was like, oh, that too?
I mean, so much. I still think being a chief of staff is the best experience you can get at being a founder without being a founder. So I'm so thankful that I've had those experiences and had the proximity to founders and understood what they care about and what keeps them up at night and, you know, how they work and think and operate. But there's so much. At the end of the day, I wasn't responsible for paying salaries. As you said, the check just, you know, hit every month. I think there's definitely a level of responsibility that while you can be very senior and you care about the organisation, at the end of the day, if you can't serve your customers, whoever they may be, or if you can't serve your investors, if you have them, like that buck stops with you. And so I think it is just a level of responsibility I don't take lightly, because particularly in payments, if our merchants can't take payments, like that can severely impact their cash flow. And so it's something that I do think about a lot. And it's why we've tried to be so focused on customer service, because there's nothing worse than when something goes wrong and you're just sitting on hold for 30 minutes without any clarity. So even if I don't have the answer right there, it's like we always try and get back to people so that they at least know that we're aware, because, you know, in any business there's always going to be a problem of some degree. It might be minor, it might be major, but as long as you can get hold of people, I think that's the biggest piece, because payments are important.
My favourite part of customer service is some of the biggest, most experienced companies in the world are constantly shocked by their always higher than expected volumes of customer calls. Funny how it's always constantly higher than expected, which you could call the new norm and actually employ some people, but no, they're just higher than expected.
Seasonality 101. But anyway.
Yeah, next quarter it'll be solved.
Yeah.
How would you say, I mean, being the experience of a founder, as you say, is really different. How would you say that's changed you on like a personal level? Do you see yourself differently now?
I think it's been, like I am, to full transparency, like I am still early in my career. And so I think it's naive to assume that I'm not still constantly growing and learning. There's a ton I don't know. And so I think being a founder has massively supercharged that learning. And again, I think chief of staff roles, phenomenal exposure to that variety of tasks. But typically by the time a chief of staff is hired, you do have key hires in other departments. We don't have a marketing team, like you're looking at it. We don't have a sales team, like it's me and Glenn, you're looking at it. And so there's been like phenomenal growth, but I think also like a phenomenal uncomfortableness. Is that even a word?
Mm-hmm. It is now.
It is now. And
Discomfort,
so
I think.
Discomfort, thank you. I was like, that doesn't sound right. And so last year, I think looking back in retrospect, if I could have chosen a word for the year, it would have been growth. And that practically meant I basically just felt uncomfortable every single day.
That's good. I feel like
Growth is
great.
feeling
Yeah.
uncomfortable.
You should always be at least, what is it, like 60, 70% uncomfortable at all times?
Yep.
I heard a quote, I wish I remember where it was from. I probably have it written down somewhere, but actually I remember exactly where it was from. It was an Instagram reel, which I probably shouldn't admit. It was a great book, big academic. And it was, you can have comfort or you can have growth, but you cannot have both. And I think I've probably said that to myself a few times a week, every week for the last year.
So tell us a little bit about the relationship with Glenn. When you both got all of this work to do, is it a case of just divide and conquer? You know, because you also, as you know, you have days where you're not at your best, you sort of flick past your co-founder. How do you manage that relationship and how do you keep it open and honest so that, you know, there isn't any lingering doubt or resentment?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, we are both so lucky that we truly love working with each other. So we met when I was still at Verve. He sat as an observer on our board. And he also came in to help us with some brand strategy and marketing pieces. So we'd had small opportunities to work together, but particularly when we were selling Verve to Future Group, through his role on the board, we did work quite closely together. So I think that was beautiful that we'd seen each other in action and we knew each other's strengths and that they would be compatible. I think without having that foundation or that certainty, it would be a much bigger decision to make. So I think first and foremost, like find a co-founder that you love working with. And then I think, again, we're really lucky that we have different experiences, and so we typically tend to different areas of the business, and we also approach problems quite differently. So I'd say he defaults to kind of macro strategy, and so I think that's been hugely important in leading some of our big strategic decisions, our big kind of pivots as a company, the decision around what we're not doing, he's really driven those conversations. And I love a strategic conversation, but I've come from a more operational background, which means I get much more into the weeds, I get much more into the detail, I'm much more on the recurring tasks. And so I think that side is great for keeping momentum in the business. And then Glenn's side is great for pulling back out and going, actually, are we putting that momentum in the right direction? So I think that's super, super helpful. And then I think we just have to have really frank conversations. Like we have to both be compassionate but frank when something's not working or when we're feeling a certain way, because I mean, these days he's probably the person I spend the most time with, which like is wild. He has a wife and a baby, so it's probably not a mutual thing. But yeah, you have to really like each other, and you have to be a compatible pairing in the skills you bring, and you have to be willing to have hard conversations. And I think,
do you go for long walks on the beach picking up rubbish together to sort it out? Or?
We actually haven't done a rubbish pickup, which we should, but
Emu parade.
We definitely time the phone calls with a walk along the beach if we're working from Manly, where we have an office, or like, hey, I'm going out for a walk. If you want to chat, like now's your window, kind of thing.
Cool.
Office hours.
Remind us what we're trying to protect. Get us away from the laptops.
Before you were talking about managing the workload of having all the different things. You don't have a sales team. You don't have a marketing team. What kind of things are you implementing to make sure that you can kind of manage that load?
Oh, definitely not enough. That's the big focus for, I think, the next couple of months for us. So I think with any early stage startup, especially in that year one, you get to like a crappy version 1 of everything and you go, this will do. Because there's so many more important things for us to figure out. Like we need to get some sales on board and get some revenue coming in. We need to, figure out where our key industries are that we should target. There's so much more important stuff to focus on. We're now at the point where we've done that first year or so. We know what's working, we know what's not. We've been really deliberate about that strategy, and now it's like, okay, how do we do what we did last year but do it 10 times faster or with more automation or in a way that can run without Glenn or I being physically on the tools. And so I would love to say I have, 800 automations running and, closing deals right now. I do not. That's talk to me in a few months.
Bit by bit.
Yeah, exactly.
So what advice would you give to founders, but also how are you thinking about it yourself in terms of, gosh, I wish I had a chief of staff. When can I get a chief of staff? When do I need a chief of staff?
I was being a bit of a brat to Glenn yesterday, and I was saying how in that chief of staff role that I did for so long, I was used to kind of identifying a problem, going in and fixing it, and then handing that new process off to someone else to run. And so that's what I've been in for the last, even consulting in some way is similar, right? You come in, you parachute, you solve a problem, and then you're not there for the ongoing work a lot of the time. And so I was kind of being a bit of a brat going, oh, this is annoying. Like I just want to solve it and then hand it off. But then I hand it off to myself and I keep running it, which I guess is motivation to make the process better, but not quite what I'm used to. So yeah, I'd love to hire a chief of staff. Unfortunately, we need a little bit more revenue coming in the door before I can hire the caliber that I'd like to hire.
So what would your threshold be? If I was a founder right now and I am torn in a million different ways, do you have a sense in your head that, okay, maybe I just need that marketing person first, or maybe I need the revenue person first, or do I get the chief of staff, as I like to call them?
The chief of everything.
Yeah, chief of staff, all the stuff.
I think for really early stage startups, at the end of the day, like cash is still king. And so I think I would still tend towards a revenue generating roles, whether that's kind of indirectly revenue generating, like a marketing capacity, or sales or growth, or whatever you want to call it. I think those will still be our first hires. I think I've come into chief of staff roles at employee number 4, and I've come into chief of staff roles at employee number kind of 12, 13, something around that mark. And I think it does depend on the business. It depends on how much you've raised. It depends on your revenue. There's not really a get to 10 and hire them kind of beautiful answer to that. I think you just need to be comfortable that you have the cash flow, because by and large, chief of staffs aren't directly revenue generating. They might help other people to generate more revenue, but they're not on the whole bringing it in themselves. And then you have to, I would recommend mapping out kind of the key buckets or focus areas that person would be working on, and making sure that there's actually enough of them for a full-time role, because it may be that actually hiring a fractional person to do a lot of that is the way to go, especially really early stage.
Well, that's one thing I did also want to explain to the Startup 360 listeners. what is the role? Because it's one of those ones that's infinitely malleable, and you are a problem fixer. It is kind of like a management consultant role.
100%. Yeah, I've heard a million different ways of explaining it, but that, like almost an internal management consultant isn't far off the mark. I will caveat this to any chief of staff listening with, I know it's different in every organisation. Please don't hit up my LinkedIn DMs later because yours is different to this. Because I will say
it's so true though.
That'd be really useful. Do it, everyone.
We'll pull together a resource.
We'll do a new book, because I have to say there's a wonderful book that I was reading over summer by Phoebe Santillan's Stocks called The Right Hand, and it was all talking to the chiefs of staff of prime ministers and leaders around the world, from Tony Blair to Julia Gillard to Justin Trudeau. All of these people who had this job of basically keeping a political leader on track.
Yep. Phenomenal. That's been at the top of my to-read list for a long time, so I need to just bite the bullet and get it. But that would be such phenomenal insight. I'm actually really excited to read that.
Arthur Sinodinos, who many will know in the startup sector, was John Howard's chief of staff. He's in there too, and he's great. His insights are really, really good.
Have you finished it? How far through are you?
I've still got a couple to go, and then I promise I'll pass it on.
Yeah, hand it on once you're done. How did you know that was coming? So I think the other caveat to a chief of staff role is it really depends on the chief of staff that you hire, what their background is. So they can come from management consulting like me, where they tend more operational or strategic. I've seen chief of staffs that have come from law, where they might also hold sort of a general counsel type role. I've seen chief of staffs come from marketing, where they might lead the marketing function and do so it can vary. Mm-hmm. But when I was in let's see if I remember, I used to have kind of 4 buckets that a chief of staff would work on, which I think is by and large does summarize most chief of staff roles in startups. So number 1 was leading company processes, or things that kind of the only natural person it would sit with would be a CEO or a founder, but obviously they're too busy. So that looks like leading the quarterly strategy planning, or OKRs, or NCTs, or whatever you call them, and then running things like all hands and making sure that the comms throughout the company are aligned and strategy is set from the top and communicated and tracked. Then there is the filling the role of someone that you haven't hired yet, or maybe has temporarily left and you're replacing them. So in my time as chief of staffs, I did sales for a month. I did, marketing to do some mat cover. I did, whatever else based on who we had in the team at the time. That means you often fulfill legal roles, as in you'd lead the legal team. If there's an outsourced legal team, you might lead the finance/accounting department until you're big enough to hire one of those. So a bit of everything. You end
up being the workplace locum, basically.
100%. You're like the point of contact for every contractor or outsourced person that you've got. The next one is sort of what I call like special projects. So a common one there is leading cap raises or helping founders with cap raises. At Verve, it was leading the business sales, so M&A activity, if you have much of that. Actually, same at my role before. Any kind of one-off big projects, R&D grants, things like that, that kind of a lumpy thing that might only last for a month or two. And then my last bucket, which I think was my favourite bucket, is shit, everything's on fire, go fix it. And I think that summarizes exactly what it is. Like the number of random little emergencies that you just get pulled into because something, a team's not working well, or something chaotic's happened, or whatever it may be. So, Verve, that looked like when all of the greenwashing stuff was happening, a lot of super funds were getting fines for greenwashing. It was like doing an immediate review of all of our policies, all of our content, talking to our head of compliance, who was awesome, and figuring out what we, were we all good? Was there anything that we needed to adjust with the new guidelines like that, so that we didn't get in any trouble for what we were saying, new policies for marketing and things. It can be super varied. It's fun though.
I'm getting like COO PTSD at the moment. It's the same thing.
I would say there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of overlap between a COO and a chief of staff, especially if you're in a company that doesn't have a physical supply chain. Whereas I think if you've got a physical supply chain, that operations role tends quite heavily to that. It can overlap quite a lot.
When I think of all the things you've just spoken about, a few words come to mind. It's chaos, complexity, and variety. What are your top tips for managing like big, complex things on a day-to-day basis?
Specifically in a chief of staff role, or just
in general? I think as a founder as well. I mean, that's definitely a theme across the two.
It's the how do you eat an elephant question.
One bite at a time.
Yep.
I think there's some personality types that like chaos and there's some that don't. And I think learning which one you are early on is quite helpful. I love chaos because it gives me a shot of adrenaline that means it'll be my most productive hour of the day, probably the week. And so for me, like if something's on fire, that's a good day. Like that's my focus, that's my priority, you know, touch wood, I should be touching some wood. Not too much. So I'm a person that thrives in chaos because I think the way my brain works is quite structured. And I think that comes from the management consulting side, but also like law degree, you're taught to kind of break down a problem into like a really structured essay or an opinion. And so I am quite good, I think, at looking at the problem, going, oh my God, there's a million things, having that temporary freak out, and then going, actually, what are those like 5 steps that we need to take to fix it? Or how do I figure out what those 5 steps are? So I'd say figuring out if you're a chaos person or not. And if you're not a chaos person, don't be in one of those roles that has a lot of chaos. And then I'd say take the moment to freak out because it'll give you the adrenaline you need. And then realize when you're freaking out is no longer becoming productive and you actually need to like go for a walk around the block or call someone or just do some deep breathing. Come up with a plan. I think this is something I can fall into occasionally where the jolt of adrenaline hits and I won't take that step back to go, actually, what's the most important first step? So taking that step back, coming up with the plan, and then just working your way through it and pulling in any new piece of information that you get and adjusting as required.
But it's wild because at the same time as being an emergency responder, you are
any
also,
actual emergency responders out there
you
rolling their
are
eyes.
also the chief fire prevention officer.
Exactly.
Your job is to sort of set up the system so that next time everything doesn't catch a blaze.
And that was like a really interesting piece of work we did at Verve, which I led with our head of engineering, whatever his title was, and around like we had, you know, an emergency happen, and then it was like, okay, what's our policy and process? So we actually relied really heavily on some of the really good startup resources out there around incident response. I think it was Atlassian's from memory, which is like step number 1 is just fight the fire, like get the fire out, get the fire contained, and then you stop and look at like, okay, well, what actually caused this fire? How do we make sure that whatever that cause was no longer exists or is mitigated to the best of our ability? And then how do we put tracking, measurement, prevention in place, policies, whatever it may be, to make sure that that's the case? And so it was a really interesting piece of work because we were writing this really broad incident response framework, which could be like any range of incidents, obviously being a regulated industry. So you have to keep it really broad to make sure that it can cover every possible fire.
Absolutely. I was going to say I was just listening.
Yeah.
Not again.
I'm going to jump back in then.
Yeah.
In that context, and it's a conversation we're having a little bit earlier, and I brought up last week, mistakes happen. Mm-hmm. And what's your view? Do you have them out loud and let people know, or do you just sort of try and put a carpet over the singe marks and pretend it didn't happen? How do you deal with those moments? Because it was a conversation we were having around media and things when things go wrong, and there are some startups who prefer that you didn't mention the war, but journalists
Topical.
tend to have long memories. What would your advice be?
I think, what's that piece of research that's like you gain customer loyalty when you handle a problem well? It's like one of the points where people will stick with you if you've proven that you can handle it well. So I think it depends on who the people you're talking about are. I think in a 2-person team, Glenn knows every mistake I've ever made because I normally call him afterwards and go, oh, I just did something so stupid. Mostly because I don't have a colleague to talk to about it, so he gets everything.
It sounds like you're a full disclosure girl.
I was actually talking about this morning with my mum. I'm a full transparency first until proven otherwise, whereas I know other people come from like full privacy first until trust is built. I like to assume people are good people. I go transparency. I'm also just not a particularly good liar unless it's a really important reason to lie. So it's easier that way for me. My approach is it's much better to openly communicate and communicate the steps you're taking to solve it if it's not solved, or what you've done to solve it, or why the thing happened, than have someone find out later and be annoyed that they didn't know. So depending obviously on the scale of the problem or whatever it is and whoever the impacted people are, I'm normally an upfront transparency type person.
All tracks back to accountability, I feel.
Yeah, I just think it's a chance for you to gain like strong customer loyalty. That's what the research shows. Because everyone's used a product of some form that's been bad or damaged or hasn't worked or something's gone wrong. And if you contact the support and you get no response and you've had a terrible time trying to communicate to them that you've had this bad experience, it just leaves you with this really sour taste in your mouth. But if you get a great response and they send a replacement, or they tell you what's going on, or they explain why it happened, or how they'll make sure it's not happening again, like that's where people stay loyal to a brand. It just provides that human touch.
I reckon there's also a funny counterintuitive thing in there, that the relief from a customer perspective that, oh my God, thank God someone else is fucking up too, because I thought it was just me. But you know what? You seem a little bit more human now, so yeah, I am going to stick by you.
Yeah. And I love like some of our first believers were like early stage startups or people in the startup industry. And if we've ever had problems with them, like I feel like we've talked about problems a lot and people are probably going, oh God, this is a terrible product. It's not, I promise. But I think I just love the conversations I have with those early stage founders so much, because it's like they're in the trenches with you. And so I'm watching their numbers go up every month and I'm like so excited to see their growth. And then they're like, how are you guys going? What's happening on your side? And so it really does feel like, this sounds cheesy, but it really does feel like a partnership with some of those early stage startups, because you're both on the same trajectory and you both have empathy for what the other person's building, and it's really cool.
That's fantastic.
Speaking of, well, hopefully not big fires. I think we want small to medium-sized fires, or just wobbles, or things
you
in
heard
general.
Maddie like chaos, and now the whole podcast is just chaos.
She's gone total firebug.
Well, I want to know. I mean, one of the things that I know fish founders we always talk about, like founders love talking. Sorry. One of the things we always talk about is some of the early challenges of like businesses at the beginning. Like, what are the big hurdles that you've had to come across so far? Because that 0 to 1 journey is not a linear one. It's quite bumpy. What have you experienced so far?
I think we've been lucky that, again, I should be touching so much wood right now, but we haven't had like major fires or major issues. There's obviously been bumps. So I think there's kind of the stuff we already talked about around like inertia and making people care enough to do something extra. Like really signing up to GreenPay is not a big lift at all. A lot of customers, it's about 15 minutes work, but for people, it feels like a big change. And so it's overcoming that inertia is probably the biggest one on the sales side. And I think that can be demoralizing, because Glenn and I, while not being, crazy hippie greenies, are like, just practically the amount of destruction we're doing to our environment isn't sustainable. And so I think that can get quite demoralizing when it just feels like people don't care. And then we've had kind of all of the stuff you'd expect, which is like identifying industries that we thought would go really well, and then for whatever restriction in that industry, maybe that hasn't been a bigger growth industry for us, so we've had to repivot strategy and things like that. But you've had to, go down that path a little bit to find out that actually that's not the best place for us to play. So those are sort of the bumps, I'd say. I should, again, touch wood.
Touch wood. Now, I also want you to give a plug to the Startmate Women's Fellowship Program, because you credit that as being transformative for you. So tell us a little bit about that experience.
100%. So maybe for those that don't know, I'm sure most people do, but the Women's Fellowship was about a 2 or 3 month program aimed at getting women out of corporate linear career paths and into startups. So helped with kind of the 101 on what startups are, how they're funded, what constitutes a startup, and then also the types of roles. And then towards the end, it was really like job hunting specific. And so I'd come out of 2 or so years at BCG, and I think for anyone that knows any management consultants, you'll know that ride isn't always the easiest. And I think any management consulting company has a very strong feedback culture, which I think any person can get to after a while. And so I left BCG feeling like I was the world's worst employee. Like I was like, who's going to hire me? I don't know what I want to do. Because obviously management consulting is so generalist. Like, I don't know where to go from here. And I was lucky that I had a couple of colleagues at BCG who either had heard of or had done the Women's Fellowship. And so they pointed me towards it. And it was like hugely impactful. I did it as I was leaving BCG, and it gave me the direction that I wanted a chief of staff role. I was headhunted through LinkedIn for my first chief of staff role, and the founder directly said that it was because I had the Startmate Women's Fellowship, because it indicated an interest in startups. I am still friends with multiple women that I went through the cohort with. Like we caught up for lunch, about 8 or 10 of us last Sunday. They're the people I call when I have a problem I don't know how to solve, because they're all still in like chief of staff or founder roles, or, Phoebe's CEO now of Startmate. So like they're the people I hit up when I need to. And yeah, hugely, I would never have gotten to startups by myself without that program.
That's incredible.
And the Press Play team are doing something very similar for women in Melbourne.
Cool.
nowadays. Award-winning, I can say, because they won one of our Startup Database and Tech Awards
huge.
last year.
No, it's such a good program. Like, yeah, the friends that I made through that are lifelong friends.
Majella, bring it home.
What is one piece of advice, or what's the best piece of advice you've received, and what is the worst piece of advice that you've received?
Oh my God, that's so hard. I don't know if I've really been given bad advice. I think some good advice that has landed really well at specific points in my career. I think one was when I was leaving BCG and I was panicking about my next step, which if for anyone who's kind of job hunting, they may be in a similar boat. And it was like very few doors are one-way doors. And so I think anytime there's a decision that I'm perhaps scared about, like co-founding GreenPay was a big decision, obviously. And I think for anyone who's kind of more of a perfectionist, it can be stressful making those big decisions. And so I think sitting with it and reminding myself that actually, if it doesn't work, you can leave, you can change. Like there's very few things that aren't two-way. So that was really helpful at like a good time in my life that I think I needed to hear that. I think the comfort or growth one has been very helpful. Bad advice.
All right, I can phrase it differently.
I don't know if I've been
What's the best bit of mansplaining you've been given?
I mean, I think it was for Startup Daily actually. Years ago while I was at Verve, you picked up a piece of mine that was about like arguments about the gender wage gap that I'd written originally for Verve. And it was kind of like common arguments as to why the gender wage gap wasn't real or didn't matter. And that comment section was exactly what you'd expect it to look like. So that's
I can
probably
see it in my brain right now.
Yeah. That was probably like the biggest concentration.
If we got you back in the chair this time next year, what would you have liked to have done?
Oh, such a good question. I would love to feel like Glenn or I could step out of the business for short periods of time and things would go. So that looks like automations. It looks like much more like many more systems in place where it's kind of doesn't just rely on us two being on the tools at all times. So I think and I'm an operations person, so that's probably obvious why that's my first response. So I think that piece of like the business being able to scale without us physically being there or doing something at that moment. I think I would want our customer base to be larger, more broad growth, etc. Like I think we 10x'd in the last 12 months. I'd like to 10x again. Obviously that looks very different from 0 to 1 versus 1 to 10. I think there's target customers we'd like to bring on board, like well-known impact brands or ones that we think would help us spread our message much wider. We'd love to have made more donations, more sizable impact that we can report back on. I mean, how long should I go on for?
That's great. Well, 365 days from now.
Yeah. I'll put it in my calendar.
Yeah, it's on. I am going to throw one more in. So does Maddi ever pause, stop? And if and when she does, what does it look like? What do you do?
Maddi has two types of pausing. One is the very natural, healthy, get home at night and read a book and go to bed early or go for a walk or, play tennis with friends, whatever. The other one is like the potato day, which I'll admit I probably have too often, which is just like me and the couch. And that might be with books or it might be, with Netflix or something. But yeah, those are the pauses. Come in two flavours.
They're good. They're normal. They're usual. I love it.
Absolutely. I think we need a batch. We actually need a batch over here in Australia that we can all go and hang out.
100%. 100%.
Great New Zealand tradition. We need to import to this country.
Yeah, agree. The crappier the better as well with batches.
Absolutely, because that way you don't have to worry about sweeping the floor and getting the sand out.
Exactly. And I want there to be 10 different ugly printed single bed mattresses that just look like they've been there for 40 years. And I need like board games with missing pieces that you can't actually really play and like some
Half-chewed Crocs.
I have no idea what batch day is, but this is like
batches are like, I guess, a holiday house, but in New Zealand, a batch is typically used to refer to like one that's been in the family for a really long time and is basically kind of just like a shack on a lake.
All those things were like out of context. I was like, we've got mattresses.
Yeah.
Should have
translated
in my head,
that.
I was thinking, is this like a crate day sort of thing? And I was very
Let's
confused.
just say it's the complete opposite of Noosa, okay?
Right.
It's not a house in Noosa or Portsea. It's it really is just kind of like a garden
like
shed.
run down, ramshackle. You kind of want you and all your cousins or the family friends all there at the same time, and there's like a bunk room with 10 kids shoved in it, and like maybe someone's got a boat, so you're biscuiting during the day kind of thing. But yeah, that's sort of the Kiwi batch.
I love it. let's bring it back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the closest thing I found here is like the unyoked cabins, but that's definitely a
Oh, yeah.
different level of premium to a batch. But similar concept and off the grid.
Maddi, thanks for joining us from GreenPay. We'll see you in a year.
Yeah, see you here. Put it in my calendar. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's it. Welcome back.
Yeah.
Did you have a good first episode for 2026?
I did. It's great to be back. It's highlight of the week once again. So
Well,
bring
missed
on
you.
the rest. I've missed you too.
I mean, there wasn't enough cricket to watch over summer, so I'm spending more time with you than the most Test matches. And the tennis.
I'm definitely spending more time with you than cricket because that would be 0. So
I felt a little bit sad for the Demon the other night, going down in straight sets to Alcaraz, but gee, he's good, isn't he? That was a cracking game if you got to see any of it.
I didn't, but I did hear about what was that one?
Pickleball?
No, what was the big? They bought it
Fly
the AO.
sweating?
That's not even how you play tennis. I don't even know what that was. The AO, how you had like that one hit, like 1 point match.
Oh, the $1 million match.
Yeah,
thing.
that was cool.
That was pretty wild,
was cool.
wasn't it? And an amateur won it.
Yeah, he was like 125th or something. I don't know.
Matt and I might have a crack. We can go in the one shot, doubles next year.
I think that's good.
We can be the special Watts. The special startup dailies.
I think I'm excited to see you guys come back as millionaires. I think that'd be cool.
Oh, absolutely. Have enough for a deposit for a house then. That is all we have time for this week. Of course, Startup 360 is a Smart Co media production, produced and edited by the fabulous Matt Jackson. Great to have him back. Thanks to James and, of course, to our new sponsor, Deal, for their support. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple, Spotify. You can also watch on YouTube. You get to see Majella's wonderful smiling face. If you haven't, go there. It's worth it. And, of course, you can read all the latest stories for free on startupdaily.net. Have a great weekend, everyone. We'll see you next Friday. Bye for now.